Today on the Twin Cities Business Show, we talk about what the fastest wind tunnel in the United States, buoys in Lake Superior, and empty tunnels in northern Minnesota have to do with the next great round of Minnesota companies. Our guest today is Bill Harper, the board chair of the Minnesota National Security Ecosystem. Welcome to the Twin Cities Business Show. I'm Charlie Ryback. I'm here today with Bill Harper. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hi, Charlie.
So, we had a conversation about a month ago, and you hit me with a bunch of really exciting ideas. Autonomous drones underwater in Lake Superior, the first hypersonic wind facility in the US in decades, all happening in Minnesota. 3D printing rocket fuel. This is exciting stuff. Do you remember a moment when you first got really interested in this work and kind of what it could mean for the state?
So I started working in the national security sector I worked in Congress for 2 decades with Congresswoman Betty McCollum. And national security work was always something in the portfolio that we covered. But getting into the sector where it's focused on innovation, entrepreneurship, advanced research is a time when it suddenly said, okay, how do we make this connection to Minnesota? And that's what we've been working on for the last 5 years.
Really exciting. So you shared with me Minnesota is 50th out of 50 states in terms of Defense Department spending.
In terms of per capita spending
capita.
in the national security and defense sector, yes, we're 50th. We're dead last. And at the same time, we are a donor state in terms of how much the taxes we pay to the federal government. So we're paying, I believe it's around $1,800 per capita. We pay more than what we get. So it's kind of a double whammy.
Yeah. Wow. So how did that happen to us in the defense sector? You shared with me, we used to have a much more robust defense industry and it sort of fell by the wayside. Can you take us through a little bit of that? And, how does it happen where Minnesota ends up with just a really unfair imbalance of spending like that?
I think we had a robust defense sector in the 70s and 80s in Minnesota. And I don't want to view this as a complete deficiency. I want to look at this in terms of we have a robust commercial sector in all over the board, Fortune 500 companies, lots of startups, fairly strong economy. It's just that it's moved in other places, other sectors, not the defense sector. In the 90s, 2000s, the economy shifted. And just as in the supercomputing in the computing area, many of these, we used to be the leader in Minnesota. A lot of that shifted to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And we now see Silicon Valley engaging in the national driving innovation in the national security sector. So I view this as a moment in time when the federal government in fiscal year 2026 is going to spend $1 trillion on defense.
Wow.
That's a number that will be sustained, if not increased, in light of what's happening with our near-peer adversaries around the world. Minnesota kind of has to get in the game. And we have to get in the game because it's good for us, but also because we've got a lot to contribute to the country. We've got amazing talent. We've got great research institutions, higher ed institutions, and we've got great innovators, entrepreneurs, and companies of all sizes. So this is an opportunity for us to grow. I would take a relatively modest sector and really grow it.
Yeah. Okay, so you're working in Congresswoman McCollum's office. You end up leaving to go do this. Take us through that journey and kind of what made you make the decision to take that leap.
I served as the chief of staff to Congresswoman McCollum for 22 years. And my last 2 years, 2021 and 2022, as her chief of staff, she served in the position of chairwoman of the House Defense Appropriations Committee. So that's at that time, it was about an $830 billion bill that she had to write. That's almost 50% of discretionary spending in the federal government, meaning the funding that Congress approves is in that one bill. So it's major. And during those 2 years, it was very difficult to find projects in Minnesota to fund in the defense sector. Now, one has to step back and say, what's the defense sector? The defense sector is a microcosm of everything the federal government does. They run a school system. They do environmental remediation. They do advanced manufacturing. They do cybersecurity, AI. You can go, advanced medicine. They have a whole, healthcare sector. So we are doing their space launch. I mean, the Defense Department is doing everything. So having the ability to look at Minnesota and say, how do Minnesota companies fully engage in that sector? How do our university research institutions engage in that sector? We weren't prepared. So I retired from my service in Congress in 2023 and said, I'm going to go out and work in Minnesota to build a sector that can take advantage of these opportunities when they become available. And what I have found is there are amazing entrepreneurs and companies all over the state who are engaged in this sector. And what they need is the chance to get in the game. They need the chance to, help navigate probably one of the most challenging bureaucracies, not only in the United States, maybe in the world. How do you get in the door?
Yeah. Super interesting. So, when looking at defense spending generally, there are things like the internet came out of Defense Department research. There are things like that where there are innovations that you wouldn't think of as being national security related that have come out of that. How are you looking at the opportunities for Minnesota now? Is it sort of bombs, bullets, missiles, or is it sort of something else? And if something else, how would you describe that?
I would describe what we're looking for as dual use capabilities. How do you look at technologies that are either in the commercial sector that are already developed and advanced that can translate and be applied to the national security sector? Or how can you look to the national security sector to make investments in innovations and technologies that then can help us all in our everyday lives? Things like we have tremendous opportunity in advanced or additive manufacturing, 3D printing. We've got many companies here that do 3D printing, whether it's polymers, whether it's metals. We're now talking about how do you meet the requirements to make replacement parts for Army vehicles in theater, on the front lines.
By 3D printing on the
3D
front lines?
printing, 3D printing new metal parts.
Wow.
How do you do that in very challenging environments? Which then obviously that will have commercial applications. Like how do you can be in northern Minnesota and 3D print your replacement part. So that's just one example of how we are moving into a place where national security and the commercial sector really are overlapping. And that's what we're also competing against globally. Because if you look at China, their industrial sector and their defense sector are completely integrated.
Yeah.
They are manufacturing at scale. And it doesn't matter if they're making a ship for their Navy or a commercial vessel for shipping goods around the world. Those shipyards they've got the workforce and the capability of really putting out product. That's what we're competing against.
So you're looking at that sort of, integrated model where, there isn't sort of national security over here and industry here. It's more of a blended infrastructure, I guess, similar to what China has. That's a place where you think we kind of need to go.
If you look at technologies like autonomy, drones, surface autonomous vessels, they're going to have military applications.
Yeah.
They're also going to have commercial applications. They're going to be delivering goods to our homes in the air. There's going to be autonomous cargo ships moving goods all over the world. We need to be able to be manufacturing those. We need to be able to have access to those. We want U.S. companies helping to drive, that global agenda.
Yeah. Really interesting. Do you have any qualms about that, of us getting more involved with defense spending, with externalities that come from that? Are there any things that you think make you nervous about that?
It's about making policy choices.
Yeah.
We want to keep our country secure. We want to keep our country strong. We want to defend our values. There are some issues right now that I think are very concerning. National security, the way I believe it needs to be framed, is in the context of diplomacy, development, and defense, kind of a three-legged stool.
Yeah.
Um, the first and foremost with defense is you'd never want to have to fight a war.
Yeah.
You want to prevent them. You want to have either deterrence or you want to create conditions where there's not going to be conflict. And for, 50, 60, 70 years, the United States was the global leader in advancing our values on human rights and democracy, in which we invested in countries to help them have economic opportunity, better healthcare, education, rule of law. And we did that through USAID. We had a robust State Department that focused on conflict reduction and conflict mitigation. Like, how do you prevent wars? Unfortunately, USAID has been dismantled. The State Department has been diminished, which leaves the Department of Defense. Those servicemen and women have a job to do. They need to be prepared. They need to be able to execute their mission. But first and foremost, they would rather not have to fight. And that means having a strong enough defense sector that is going to deter anyone willing to be aggressive with the United States. We have seen our country make good policy choices and bad policy choices over the decades. That does not diminish the fact that we need to be able to protect ourselves. Let me give you an example. Last year, the city of St. Paul suffered a very aggressive cybersecurity attack that shut down a lot of their digital infrastructure. Governor Walz was required to call in the Minnesota National Guard to assist. I mean, these are the types of new threats we face. This isn't all bombs and bullets. In fact, much of the time it will not be. It's going to be cyber attacks. It's going to be attacks on potentially space satellite attacks that can shut down entire sectors of our economy. So we have to protect our critical infrastructure. We have to protect our population. We have to make sure, with thousands and thousands of miles of border, that we are not going to be subject to, various types of incursions. So we have to protect ourselves. And at the same time, we have allies around the world that are looking to the United States, in Europe, in Asia. They're looking to us as an ally, an irreplaceable ally, that it needs to be there in the event that they are vulnerable.
Yeah. One of those allies is Ukraine.
Yes.
Um, there's been a lot of conversation about how the war in Ukraine has shifted how people are thinking about drones, drone warfare, and kind of what they mean. I'd love to just get your take on that, and what implications you think that might have for either of the dual uses, right? For either military side things or for civilian side things. Just developments that have come from, I think, one of the bigger hot war conflicts that's happening out there right now.
The war in Ukraine has transformed how we have to look at conflict in the 21st century, because um, we have seen the old way of conflict just be transformed. Russia had armored units going into Ukraine, which were completely destroyed by autonomous, by drones, by
Right.
UAS. We saw strategic bombers on the ground in Russia, billions of dollars of worth of aircraft destroyed by drones that were flown from Ukraine. That we also see very low cost armaments that are being, whether it's Iran and what their attack on Israel, or what we see in the Red Sea coming out of the Houthis in Yemen, where the very low cost technology is being shot down with multi-million-dollar missiles. So there is an economic disparity. After a while, you start extracting, even though those attacks may be unsuccessful, you are extracting a significant economic cost. And that comes back to the United States in terms of our manufacturing capability. We're facing shortages sometimes of armaments, of munitions, because we're lacking the manufacturing capability.
So that means we literally don't have enough
We will
bombs or
run out.
yeah.
We will run out. And when you look at Ukraine and Russia, they are producing literally millions of drones. We don't have the capability in the United States to do that because they're to get it. Both sides are essentially being sourcing their supply chain, and they're sourcing from China.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to have the ability to produce in within the United States with a secure supply chain, the batteries, the electrical hookups, the sensors, the polymers, and the materials for the 3D, all of it. And it's a challenge. We are being challenged right now.
Really interesting. Um, Going back to one of the specific examples I brought up at the beginning, hypersonic wind facility.
Mhm.
North Wind has this brand new facility that is coming online soon. Can you take us through a little bit about what that means? I mean, both in the literal sense and then sort of the broader vision of what it could become.
Sure. Um, First of all, Northwind, in various iterations of its company, have been in the Twin Cities, I believe, dating back to the early '50s. So this is a homegrown Minnesota company,
Yeah,
and in fact, they have a wind tunnel facility that was built in 1960, started for the space race. It's still operating today in Plymouth.
wow.
So, and that was before 494. So I think it was still farmland out there. So this is the ability to do aerospace testing here in the Twin Cities is something that's been around. But what has happened is advanced technology in the defense sector, particularly hypersonic technology, which means going 5 times faster than the speed of sound.
That sounds very
That's,
uncomfortable.
yeah, Mach 5. So
Yeah.
that's fast. Um, we have not built a new aerospace ground test facility in the United States since the '80s
Why?
because it was a priority and then it was not a priority. And we were leading the world in the early 2000s. And then with the conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq, we took our eye off the ball and moved into other things to service that, to meet the needs of that conflict.
Trying to deal
And
with sort of desert
it's
conflict.
time. I mean, we were up armoring Humvees, if you remember, when
Right.
our service members were at severe risk. So some of these new innovations, they took a back seat.
Yeah.
And while we stopped innovating in a sector like hypersonic, the Chinese overtook us. And now China has hundreds of deployed hypersonic weapons, and we don't have any. So
What does that mean? Hypersonic weapon.
a hypersonic weapon, instead of with a ballistic missile where you make an arch, these can fly straight.
Oh,
They're flying so fast and they're so maneuverable. And the danger with hypersonics is that you have very limited time to intervene. So it's really, we not only don't have offensive hypersonic weapons, we don't have the ability to stop to defend ourselves against hypersonic weapons, which is
wow.
very scary.
That is terrifying.
So Northwind is an expert in designing ground test facilities for for commercial and defense and space. And we have an opportunity to build a brand new, the first in decades in the United States, a aerospace and hypersonic test facility here in Minnesota. It's going to be in Rosemount, and it's a partnership with Northwind, the state of Minnesota, and the U.S. government. It is going to bring together modeling and simulation expertise that's preeminent, maybe in the world, out of the University of Minnesota, and put it at this facility. And it's going to be quite extraordinary. It's going to meet a national imperative. And eventually, this is the type of technology and testing that will evolve into commercial aerospace. Maybe not in our lifetimes, but there will be a day when hypersonic planes will be flying passengers all over the globe in hours. And that's that's an opportunity for an example of how dual use investment in a national security technology eventually will translate into a commercial application that everyone will benefit from.
Really interesting. And in theory, the North Wind facility can be a catalyst for a bunch of things that can evolve around that and be innovative new businesses.
It's absolutely. This is going to be a magnet of innovation. Companies from all over the United States are going to be coming here to test and evaluate their technologies. Um, by and large, what Northwind is producing is data. Companies are coming in with their prototypes, and they're going to be put into a chamber, and high temperature, high pressure, and they're going to see how this reacts, how this would react in the real world.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, I want to jump to another one here. Biomade. Tell me more about Biomade.
Biomade was created. It's something I worked on in Congress. Biomade was created in 2020 by the Department of Defense, and it's within the something called the manufacturing. It's a Manufacturing Innovation Institute, and this is an area where Biomade is using agricultural inputs and microorganisms in biology to produce a industrial chemical output. And the rationale for this is when you start looking at supply chain for many of the products are important to defense or critical commercial areas, the supply chain ultimately leads back to China. And that becomes a strategic vulnerability because as we're now seeing with things like rare earth minerals, they can put on export controls or just cut off the supply, which leaves us crippled. So Biomade's thesis is we have an abundance of agricultural products, and it's not primary products. It can be agricultural waste products that can be turned into feedstock. We can, if by and large, whatever biology can do it better than chemistry. Meaning,
Right.
if you look to the natural world, and you look at how evolution has played out in all forms of life, usually those products are the strongest, the hardest, the tough, the most durable, biodegradable,
Yeah.
on and on and on. So using microorganisms, using things like fermentation, essentially what Biomade is doing is creating large microbreweries to produce chemicals that are now environmentally sustainable. And those chemicals at scale will then go into products that we use every day. But they will also supply the defense sector of critical products when they are needed.
Yeah.
And depending on where facilities get built around the company's scale, they will use different agricultural inputs and different sort of biological formulas to produce the outputs.
So can you give an example of one of those and kind of the biological things that people are looking at as an example?
Well, on the commercial side, Lululemon uses a biomanufactured polyester instead of a petroleum-based polyester for some of their apparel.
Wow. Do you have any idea what the feedstock on that is, or
I do not,
it's just some agricultural
but it's an
byproduct?
and by and large, it's glucose. How you get that glucose. Um, there's an example that I know the Biomade folks use often, of which natural rubber is increasingly becoming a scarce commodity in Southeast Asia because of a fungus that's killing rubber trees. Well, it's been developed. There's a species of dandelions that can produce in their root system a product that's almost identical to natural rubber. So Goodyear is working with the Department of Defense to produce fields of dandelions and figure out how to extrude that substance in order to make a new form of rubber. So these are innovators, scientists, and entrepreneurs who are looking at doing the research, figuring out how to produce at scale, and then commercializing ideas that are going to make our lives better.
Wow. I had no idea the US military was subsidizing yoga pants. That's pretty incredible. Really interesting. So where does that company go? It has a presence here. What do you think the next 5 or 10 years for Biomade look like, and how does it impact Minnesota?
So companies like entities, Biomade's a nonprofit. They are leading a national network. Biomade entities like Northwind, what they really are doing is creating test and evaluation facilities. So the premise is not that they are going to be producing products. The premise is they are going to help companies in the development process prove out their technology to be able to commercialize it.
So they'll sort of be the research hubs,
They are the enabler.
enabler.
And so, in a Biomade scenario, how do you take a company that can produce 10 liters of something in the lab to produce 10,000 liters in Biomade's pilot scale facility so that the company can then go out and produce 1 million liters at commercial scale?
Wow.
So, the question there is, once a company proves their technology, how does the state of Minnesota create an enabling environment to keep that company wanting to locate here in our state?
Yeah. So they come here for testing, and then we need to keep them here
That's exactly right.
to build stuff.
And what
Where's the
we're
Biomade facility?
Biomade is headquartered in Minnesota in Northeast Minneapolis,
Okay.
and they are building their pilot scale facility in Maple Grove.
Interesting.
But what they're up against is companies going to Europe,
Yeah.
where there are dozens of pilot scale test facilities, and they take their technology there, prove it out, and then oftentimes they get recruited to stay either Europe or go to a third country where where it's feasible to produce at commercial scale. So our challenge is to keep these innovators right here in Minnesota.
Yeah. So how did Europe get dozens of those and we don't have any? How did that happen?
They made the investment.
Yeah.
And with Biomade in Minnesota, it's the Department of Defense that has made the investment that otherwise was not commercially viable to make. No commercial entity was going to invest the capital to do a testing facility, because that's probably not a commercially viable proposition.
Yeah.
But with the government support, the goal here is to create an entirely new industry in bioindustrial manufacturing. And you need this test facility to be able to enable that environment.
So no private company. It doesn't make sense for a private company necessarily to build the test facility. So in Europe and in China, the through line is they have state support. They build the testing facility, and then that enables this commercial stuff that sits on top of it. And we haven't been doing that and are now starting to dip our toes in the water.
That's exactly right. And another example of why this test and evaluation capability is so important. You can look to Ukraine. U.S. equipment in the autonomous space largely failed in Ukraine. And it failed in Ukraine because it was not tested and evaluated under the conditions that it would be on the battlefield.
So it was just
in theater.
in the lab. It worked in the lab, then they brought it out.
Or if you tested a proving ground in Arizona and it's winter in Ukraine,
it's an issue.
It's an issue. Your materials are going to work differently. This is where Minnesota, in many regards, in this test and evaluation space, has a real opportunity. Our seasons, our landscape, our innovators, our ability to attract talent. We can be a place where in the national security sector, we can be testing and evaluating, and then hopefully serve as almost a magnet to attract those startup companies and those early stage companies to locate and become Minnesota companies.
So our weather is actually an advantage.
When you think about how literally the world is changing, climate change, the Arctic is now going to be a contested theater globally. China's going to have access to it. Russia has access to it. There's going to be exploration for mineral wealth. And the shipping lanes may be open much of the year, if not all of the year. That's going to put real strategic pressure on Alaska. And our allies, Canada, the Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe. So to test products for the Arctic theater, Minnesota is going to be very well positioned.
So that touches on something interesting, which is, the military and the whole national security system feels like it's been ahead of the game on climate change for a little bit here because they have to deal with the reality of how things are going on. Is that an accurate description? Is that still happening? And how do you think the whole national security world is looking at the changing climate and some of the risks that it presents?
Obviously, this subject has been highly politicized.
Yeah.
But the realities are the realities. And the intensities of storms when you look at where military facilities are, I mean, how many times can an airbase get destroyed and be rebuilt,
Right.
kind of thing. We know that these changing climate affects even things like disease outbreaks where our service members are stationed. Um, so I actually believe the Department of Defense and a number of federal agencies, while they may change the labels of names,
Yeah.
they are focused on the problem. And the problem is that this is a new reality we have to deal with. And we're either going to have to um, we have to confront it directly. One of the things that's interesting here again in Minnesota with some of the investments that have been made, we've got great companies in what let's call this expeditionary power space. How do you deploy people in austere environments? Well, you use things like solar microgrids to set them up, or we've got a great company called Verterra that is producing a hydropower generator.
It's a beautiful product. You
Yeah,
see, look up Verterra if you want to
yeah.
see a really,
So,
really cool
and that's
product.
expedition. I mean, it can be put on a backpack and go tapped into the river, and you've got a source of power. And
Wow.
one of the things their service members are facing is they're carrying so much weight because everything they have has to be battery powered. And those batteries have to be charged. And this idea of moving fuel all over the globe is expensive, it's dangerous. We lose during the Iraq war, we lost so many service members simply because we had to transport fuel. Same thing in Afghanistan. It was exorbitantly expensive. So anything we can do using Defense Department research dollars to create new forms of renewable energy that can be deployed is really a benefit to everybody. We've got a great company in St. Paul called Lima. Lima is ruggedizing solar power microgrids for the Army Corps of Engineers. They're also deploying them on the Wind River Indian Reservation for tribal homes that have never been electrified.
Wow.
So
Dual
here's
use.
dual use. I mean, it's like a real winner. They're also in South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, powering maternal child health clinics.
Wow.
So this may end up being the vision of the new form of defense diplomacy development where technology helps the American brand around the world to improve quality of life, create economic opportunity, and hopefully allow for more political stability.
Yeah. Wow. What's going on in Lake Superior?
Lake Superior. Um, well, our, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Canada's beautiful lake is really an inland sea.
Yeah.
It's like an ocean. And from a national security perspective, it's a secure ocean, meaning we don't have prying eyes. So we have a company in Minnesota called NOAI that has started working in Lake Superior deploying buoys funded through the US Navy. Those buoys are have sensors, and they are capturing AI using the aquatic acoustic signature in the lake to start creating an artificial intelligence labeling system for the Navy. So that you can, when you get these SODAR reads, you start having, whether it is maritime vessels, whether it is mammals, whether it is pleasure crafts identified. And this is going to help the Navy when they're looking at their sonar around the world. They will then build classified models on top of that. But this is cutting edge. But Lake Superior can be so much more. And that so much more is really a place to test surface and underwater autonomous vehicles in a safe, secure place. So we see Lake Superior Test Range as one of the future innovations. We're in the national security space in Minnesota, but I think we're even going to take it a little further. And that is really looking at multi-domain,
What does that mean?
multi-domain interoperable autonomy. So what that means is below the surface, on the land, in the air, and then interoperable. How do these diverse autonomous systems communicate together, work together? Okay. Minnesota, there's all one of the areas where the Department of Defense needs assistance is in deploying autonomous systems in tunnels. Well, northern Minnesota has miles and miles and miles
Wow.
of mining tunnels that are abandoned, and they simulate conditions that you may find in a place like North Korea. And you need to be able to have service members and special operators train in realistic conditions. And a lot of times we're not going to be sending humans down there, right? We're going to want to be sending robots and autonomous products. So, how do you test something underground with something that's on the ground, with something that's in the water, that's something that's in the air? And that's part of what this interoperable autonomous test range can prove. We're talking to, I know North Dakota is very involved. There's a real potential to have this vision go from North Dakota, Minnesota, northern Wisconsin to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So that's part of what this vision of a large, significant test range in the United States. We have the ability to do it in 4 seasons, which is incredibly valuable. Right now, on the unmanned aerial systems, a lot of the long range testing is being done in Australia because they have large expanses of land.
For our military
The
equipment.
US military. We could be doing that across the northern United States. So we have an opportunity. We do not have, everyone knows Minnesota does not have a big defense footprint. We don't have a military base here. And while we have prime contractors, we don't have massive defense industrial base facilities. So this sector of defense innovation, testing, and evaluation could be the niche where Minnesota makes its mark.
Wow. I'd, by the way, keep our eyes on some of those people in Wisconsin, but it's just a personal feeling. When thinking about, if we have these great testing facilities and Minnesota as a state is trying to be a place where we can keep these companies growing and setting up shop here, what does that look like and what's it going to take?
Well, we want to attract companies. The other thing we need to do and remember is we need to keep our talent. And if we are, we produce top-notch talent, and if top-notch talent, that talent wants to work in this sector, they're by and large leaving the state. What we're finding with the Northwind project at the Minnesota Aerospace Complex is they are actually attracting Minnesotans who left the state back to Minnesota.
Wow.
We have this preeminent aerospace engineering department at the University of Minnesota. This is going to give those students a place, those who want to stay in Minnesota, a place to do cutting edge research, cutting edge work in their field right here in the state. So the talent is one area. We need to create this culture of innovation around test and evaluation that is going to help companies succeed as they move through their development phase. And as they succeed, being next to that test and being co-located by a test and evaluation facility is going to be a great attraction. A lot of the companies we're probably initially looking at are going to be emerging companies in the low TRL level. So their low technology readiness level, which means as they mature next to this test range, there's a good chance if we can create incentives, we can keep them here in Minnesota. And that should be part of our goal. An economic framework that helps to grow Minnesota's economy, grow this innovation base, and make companies want to stay in our state.
Wow. That's fascinating. In January, this Defense Innovation Hub opened up here. Can you tell people a little bit about what that means for the state?
So the backstory on the hub is in January of 2025, as I was working in this sector, we created a group called the Minnesota National Security Ecosystem, 501c6 business association. And partially because as I was working with companies and I'd bring people together, they were just a buzz. So excited to meet other innovators, other entrepreneurs in this space, and they were learning from each other. And I started to realize we have to create a bigger venue for people to come together. So we created this business association. Right now, we're at 50 companies in 3 universities. Very exciting. We used the Minnesota National Security Ecosystem then to secure a contract to open a Defense Innovation Unit OnRamp Hub. And we're the 8th OnRamp Hub in the United States. It is in St. Paul, opened in January, 7 full-time professional staff, most with military backgrounds. And their role is to really help Minnesota companies, universities, innovators to get connected to the demand signals being sent from the Department of Defense. And they're also going to be working with commercial companies who have innovations that could be applied to the Department of Defense. Another role they're going to play is they're really going to be the portal into Minnesota for the department. We don't really have while we have Camp Ripley and the 148th Fighter Wing in Duluth as military installations, we really don't have a formal place for the US government to come into Minnesota and say, hey, who can we work with in advanced manufacturing or manufacturing automation? Can you find us some companies? Or where's their excess manufacturing capability? We want to be able to do some work here. So this is now going to be the portal that hopefully the Department of Defense is going to come into. It will then allow the hub to work with state government, local government, companies, universities to do some matchmaking, to bring people together, to elevate and profile ideas, and to start this dialogue about how Minnesota can play a role in national security, sustain our leadership in the commercial sector, and just make an impact. One area that people don't think about, but defense health. University of Minnesota has great capabilities. Mayo Clinic is involved in defense health work. We've got great with our medical device sector and our MedTech 3.0 coalition. There is so much opportunity for Minnesota to play a role in defense health. If you can provide innovations for critical battlefield medicine, you can provide innovations for emergency room medicine or for other types of potential mass casualty events in our
Right.
country, or for that car accident victim who's 4 hours from a hospital in northern Minnesota. How do we use these lessons? And again, dual use. How do we use investments in defense health to apply to civilian healthcare needs? And these are some of and we've got the capacity to do really great things here in the state in that sector as well.
Yeah. Wow. Do you think the US will ever go to war with China?
I hope not.
Me too.
I hope not. And I believe there are sufficient mechanisms in place if we are use them effectively to prevent war. But at the same time, I believe while the focus should be on preventing war, we have to be prepared in the event that there is a conflict. And we need to make sure that if we're going to be sending men and women into a conflict, that they are going to have what they need to prevail. So that's it's a tough world and it's a tough situation. But we can't. I don't feel like we can be naive about what the realities of the world are right now, and we have to be prepared.
Yeah. Um, so you have to do a lot of thinking about threats and risks in a geopolitical sense, and you're also a human being. So, what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night is I feel like we have the ability to do so much more. We're we have the ability to solve really big problems. And rather than potentially provoking conflict or squandering resources. We have to be better at doing the important things. Um, Nothing should focus our attention more than what happened with COVID. In that, you know, the resources, competing companies, the best minds all came together.
Right.
And while we took on a crisis of global significance, and the United States' leadership and mankind's leadership solved that problem. And we have the ability to solve big problems. And what keeps me up is that the United States cannot cede its leadership position, and we cannot diminish our values, because that's who we are as a country and as Americans. And that's the country I want my kids to live in, where we're standing up for values that reflect, reflect what we do here in Minnesota. We reflect what we do in the United States. So those are things that worry me. You know, I'm not, I know growing up as a young kid, the threat of nuclear war was always like one of those
Right.
things, the boogeyman out there. Um, these are choices, and we don't have to make those choices. We can make better choices, and that's what we really need to be working on.
Really interesting. I think that's all we got for today. Thank you so much for the time.
Charlie, this is a pleasure.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Big thanks to Keely Doyle, Ali Alt, Connor O'Neill, Mike Novak, and Gabe Noah for all your help behind the scenes. We will see you next episode.